It's Planet America time. Hello, I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz the Chidello.
This week, Bernie Sanders wins big in Nevada.
Thank you all very much.
The campaign is heading south. We'll look at the black vote and what makes it different.
And we'll ask a former Obama advisor if the former president should get involved.
He knows that you become a stronger, better, more effective candidate when you have to compete in every state across the country.
And all the latest from today's South Carolina debate. But first,
Bernie Sanders, a 78-year-old Democratic Socialist and independent senator from Vermont, has established himself as the clear favourite for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination, with a dominant showing in last weekend's Nevada caucuses.
We won the popular vote in Iowa. We won the New Hampshire primary. And according to 3 networks in the AP, we have now won the Nevada caucus.
It wasn't even close. Sanders won more than twice as many votes as his nearest rival on the second round of balloting, former VP Joe Biden, holding on for a distant second place, followed by Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren, then Klobuchar and Steyer. Sanders picked up 24 more delegates to take his tally to 45. Biden won 9, giving him 15 in total. Buttigieg still in second overall after picking up 3 in Nevada. Nobody else adding to their tallies, Chaz.
yeah, Sanders had a huge night. He even showed up the culinary union, who'd been talking smack about his Medicare for All policy. Sanders ended up winning 5 of the 7 caucus sites where the culinary union has a large presence, and he tied one of the other 2. Meanwhile, Sanders did well in pretty much every category in the exit polls. The only category he really struggled in was those over 65 years old, which Biden, unsurprisingly, won by a long way. Sanders actually came 5th in that category. He's going to want to address that, though, because those oldies have a tendency to vote a lot. Moderates is another traditional weak spot for Sanders, which Biden won again. But Sanders did tie with Buttigieg there for second, so I don't think he'd be too worried about that one. And Sanders has really closed the gap on Biden with the black vote. Only 10 points behind Biden now, and if that result is reflected in South Carolina, Biden would be getting a little bit nervous, I think. Oh, by the way, check out Pete Buttigieg at the bottom there on 2% of the black vote. I'm starting to think that Buttigieg might be stopping and frisking voters outside polling locations or something. Black voters hate him so much.
So much. Still, after the Nevada result, Joe Biden was talking up his chances of storming back into contention.
We're going to win in South Carolina. And then Super Tuesday, and we are on our way.
Well, the only poll taken in South Carolina in the few days since Nevada suggests Biden's confidence may be well-founded. He is leading Bernie Sanders by 15 points, according to Triple P, although other recent polls have put Bernie well within striking distance. But look, here's why Bernie Sanders is looking so strong right now. Next Tuesday is Super Tuesday, when 16 states and territories will vote. Bernie leads in California with its whopping 416 delegates by double digits. The next biggest prize, Texas, is closer, but Bernie's in front. In North Carolina, Sanders is 2 points ahead of Bloomberg. Public polling in Virginia is sparse, although a Monmouth poll last week had Sanders and Bloomberg tied. Bernie is leading in his home state of Vermont by a handy 38 points. Amy Klobuchar leads her home state of Minnesota, but by only 6, while in Elizabeth Warren's home state of Massachusetts, Bernie was 1 point ahead in the only poll released this year. In Maine, Bernie led by 9 in the latest poll. In Colorado, it's Sanders by 9 again. Mike Bloomberg leads in Oklahoma by 6, and there are no recent polls from the remaining states to give us a good idea at all as to what's going on, although Biden is hoping that his support amongst African-American voters is holding up and gets him some delegates in the Deep South. The bottom line is, by this time next week, Bernie Sanders may have an insurmountable lead in this primary, unless Biden or Bloomberg or somebody else can do something extraordinary.
It would have to be pretty special, John. Leaving aside the delegate lead that Sanders may be about to rack up, just look at his favourability rating. 74% amongst Democrats, 7 points ahead of Biden, 10 points ahead of Warren, miles ahead of the rest. Even amongst the general public, Sanders easily has the highest favourability ratings of the field, so it's no surprise at all that he's winning.
We'll see if this makes a difference, though. This week, Bernie Sanders faced renewed scrutiny over comments that he made about communist Cuba back in 1985.
You may recall way back in, 1961, they invaded Cuba. And everybody was totally convinced that Castro was the worst guy in the world, that all the Cuban people were going to rise up in rebellion against Fidel Castro. They had forgot that he educated their kids, gave them health care, totally transformed the society.
Well, this week, Sanders was standing by that 35-year-old interview while condemning the authoritarian nature of the Castro regime.
Unfair to simply say everything is bad. You know, when Fidel Castro came into office, you know what he did? He had a massive literacy program. Is that a bad thing? Even though Fidel Castro did it?
There's a lot of dissidents imprisoned in Cuba.
That's right, and we condemn that.
It is worth noting, though, that while this became a big story this week, it's not exactly new. Sanders was asked about that same 1985 interview and his support for socialist and communist regimes, including Castro's, during a 2016 primary debate.
Cuba is, of course, an authoritarian, undemocratic country, and I hope very much as soon as possible it becomes a democratic country. But on the other hand, it would be wrong not to state that in Cuba they have made some good advances in healthcare.
That didn't go down too well with Florida's large expat Cuban exile community, who are mostly anti-communist and anti-Castro, and became anti-Bernie. He lost that primary by more than 30 points 4 years ago. Now, the fact-checkers do say that Sanders' claims about literacy under Castro in Cuba are mostly true. Illiteracy fell from more than 23% when Castro came to power to below 4% just 2 years later. But PolitiFact also points out the literacy program had a blunt political message. It was basically propaganda. Lessons had titles such as "Fidel is our leader," and greater literacy basically meant state-run newspapers had a greater reach. Either way, it has raised fears that Bernie Sanders could lose his current tiny lead over President Trump in Florida if he is the nominee, Chaz.
And that's presumably the reason that Republicans are getting very excited about this story,
Yep.
John. The general election campaign appears to have begun. Similarly, we heard at the end of last week that Congress was briefed that Russia may be interfering in the 2020 campaign to try to get President Trump re-elected, which is all a bit 2017 called. They want their news headlines back. But then the National Security Advisor pushed back on the story.
I haven't seen any intelligence that Russia is doing anything to attempt to get President Trump reelected.
Fair enough. He's the National Security Advisor. He should know. But then, interestingly, the next day we heard that Bernie Sanders had been briefed that Russia was attempting to help his presidential campaign. Importantly, though, this was supposed to interfere with the primaries, not as yet for the general election. And I'm emphasising that for a reason that's coming up. Now, obviously, there is nothing that Republicans would like more than to flip the Russiagate script of the last few years and create this.
It's very funny.
But to be fair, Sanders released a pretty decent statement saying, "I don't care, frankly, who Putin wants to be president. My message to Putin is clear. Stay out of American elections. And as president, I'll make sure that you do." Hard to argue with that. Unfortunately, he then followed up with a conspiracy theory about how the story got out.
How do you think it came out now? You had the briefing a month ago.
Well, I'll let you guess about one day before the Nevada caucus. Why do you think it came out? Was the Washington Post? Good friends.
Actually, that was the best time for the story to come out for Sanders. The day before a caucus that Sanders was going to smash anyway, and after 80% of the votes had already taken place through early voting. Although some of Sanders' competitors were even worse. They were actively stoking people's paranoia. Mike Bloomberg, for instance, tweeting, "Feel the burn" in Russian. But anyway, this is where it gets a little bit worrying, because remember the president's national security advisor before? He also said this.
There are these reports that they want Bernie Sanders to get elected president. That's no surprise. He honeymooned in Moscow. The President Trump has rebuilt the American military to an extent we haven't seen since Ronald Reagan. So I don't think it's any surprise that Russia or China or Iran would want somebody other than President Trump.
So he's assuming that Putin wants Sanders to win the general election, not the primaries, which is what the intelligence suggested. He threw in that Moscow honeymoon thing like a hack, and then he sucked up to Trump something chronic, which makes me wonder, can we trust his downplaying of the Trump story before? For that matter, can we trust anything he says? So strap yourself in. It might be that type of general election campaign.
out of context on Nevada caucus night. Bernie Sanders plans to celebrate his big win by getting a tattoo on his face.
Don't tell anybody. I don't want to get them nervous.
Elizabeth Warren warns that baby Godzilla is on the loose.
A threat that is coming our way. And it's a big threat. Not a tall one, but a big one.
And Amy Klobuchar's last-ditch effort to win, trying to get her opponents into a wood chipper.
I challenge my opponents to do a rally in Fargo.
That was Nevada caucus night.
So, this week, the focus of the Democratic primary race is firmly on the Palmetto state of South Carolina.
Where, by the way, the majority of Democrat voters are African Americans, one of the most crucial and loyal Democratic voting groups.
Yeah, for more than 30 years, in fact, the winner of the greatest number of black voters in the Democratic primaries has gone on to win the nomination. South Carolina is the first state from the old Confederacy to vote in the primaries. Appropriately enough, it was also the first state to secede from the Union in 1860, triggering the American Civil War. And it wasn't until after the racially motivated church shooting in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015 that the Confederate flag was finally taken down from the grounds of the State House. Take it down! While around 13% of the US population is black or African American, in South Carolina it is over 27%. For Democrats, whether it's in the primaries or the general election, black voters can make the difference between winning and losing. In November 2016, while 65% of white Americans voted, just 59% of black Americans cast a ballot. That was down from 66% in Barack Obama's re-election year of 2012, when 62% of white adults voted. That switch helped elect Donald Trump. But the Democrats' problems in 2016 weren't just about black turnout, which can be as much to do with voter suppression as a lack of enthusiasm for a candidate. In 2012, Obama won 94% of the black vote overall. 4 years later, Hillary Clinton won 88%. Gender played a part in that. 94% of black women voted for Clinton, while 82% of black men did. 13% of black men voted for Donald Trump. That was up 2 points from Romney's share in 2012. Black Democratic voters are generally less progressive than white Democratic voters. That's partly due to religion. South Carolina is the 6th most religious state in America. 47% of South Carolinians go to church at least weekly. 66% pray every day. 69% say religion is very important in their lives. 74% say they are absolutely certain God exists. That explains ads like this from Tom Steyer.
We thank you, God, for your blessings.
My belief in God is about protecting human beings.
But the voters of South Carolina can be fickle. They broke late in 2008 in favour of Barack Obama. In November 2007, Hillary Clinton led by as much as 24 points. Less than 2 months later, Obama had won by 29 points.
Yes, we can. Thank you, South Carolina. I love you.
South Carolina is the biggest prize of the primaries so far, with 54 delegates up for grabs. Joe Biden's big lead of almost 30% in polls from last October is now a distant memory. His firewall is looking pretty thin, maybe flammable. Still, Bernie Sanders may have a ceiling in the South as well.
It is projected when all the votes are counted in South Carolina, Hillary Clinton will pick up what our election unit is calling an overwhelming victory in South Carolina.
In 2016, Hillary Clinton cleaned his clock in the Palmetto state, claiming almost 3/4 of the vote. So, could that provide an opening for a Biden comeback or for another moderate like Buttigieg or Klobuchar? We're about to find out.
I just want to pick up on that point of yours, John, that you made before about the black vote actually being more moderate than the white Democratic vote. It leads to some weird places. Like, for instance, according to Data for Progress, if you mention Mike Bloomberg's old discriminatory policy of stop and frisk to white voters, it decreases their Bloomberg support by 1.6%. Fair enough. But if you mention stop and frisk to black voters, it only decreases their Bloomberg support by 0.1%. And if you mention it to Asian or Latino voters, it actually increases their Bloomberg support by 0.3 and 0.8% respectively. So What's that all about? Well, the white Democratic vote and the non-white Democratic vote have been drifting apart for some time now. Black Democrats over the last 20 years have only become 8 points more likely to call themselves liberal. Hispanic Democrats have become 9 points more likely, but white Democrats are now 20 points more likely to call themselves liberal. And that liberal identity gap is only growing larger when it comes to social issues, with black Democrats growing more liberal by only 3 points, whereas white Democrats have grown more liberal by 22 points when it comes to social issues. And this creates the perverse situation where white Democrats have become more worried about racial issues than black people are. In response to the statement, Irish, Italians and Jews overcame prejudice and worked their way up. Blacks should do the same with no special favours. This many black people disagreed with that statement, whereas these are the white liberals who disagreed, saying that black people should get special favours. Look what's happened in the last few years. And the largest share of white liberals than black people say that racial discrimination is the main reason that black people can't get ahead. Conversely, a smaller share of white liberals than black people say that black people who can't get ahead are responsible for their own condition. But why is this? John mentioned religion before, and that is one theory, but there's a few more. Hispanic and black Democrats are only slightly more college educated than they were 20 years ago. But white Democrats have become much more college educated. And college can do some strange things to you. Whoa. Another theory comes from a study last year that found even adjusting for other demographic categories, black voters were especially inclined to choose established candidates and to assess contenders based on their ability to preserve hard-won civil rights and racial equality gains. In other words, black people have more to lose, so they don't take chances. So what does all this mean for the election? It means a larger share of moderates are black, and a larger share of moderates are Hispanic, and a much smaller share of moderates are white than Democrats overall. And this filters through to every issue. 59% of white Democrats support Medicare for all, compared to 47% of black Democrats. 36% of white Democrats want to return the country to how it was before Trump, whereas 64% want to advance a more progressive agenda than existed under Obama. But for black Democrats, 52% want to go back to how it was before Trump under Obama, and 48% less of them want a more progressive agenda. And in terms of the issues that they want to hear about, black Democrats are 30 points more interested in hearing about candidates' plans to create jobs. And they're also 28 points more interested in hearing about how candidates would keep the country safe. Whereas white Democrats are 28 points more interested in hearing about candidates' plans to combat climate change, more liberal policy. And obviously, as John said, this flows through to candidate preference as well. Hence Joe Biden doing well with black voters. Although, not entirely. Even back in January, when Biden was dominating the black vote, he was still doing much better with the older black voters than he did with the younger black voters. And the better educated, less religious, and less likely to remember the civil rights era, young black voters preferred Bernie Sanders. And that was when Biden was winning the black vote by 30 points. But what happens when the safe establishment candidate doesn't seem so safe anymore? These were the shares of South Carolina black support for Biden and Sanders directly before Iowa. And these were the shares directly after New Hampshire, 2 weeks later. Now, what happens 2 weeks after that? We find that out on the weekend. Big, beautiful world.
Still to come on Planet America, we'll see what happened in today's debate. But first, let's take a look at this weekend's vote in South Carolina. Joining us from Mount Pleasant is Anton Gun. He's a former senior advisor to President Barack Obama. He's also a former member of the South Carolina House of Representatives. Anton, welcome to Planet America.
Thank you for having me.
So how well, in your view, does Joe Biden have to do in South Carolina to get his campaign back on track?
So I think, number one, Joe Biden has to do very, very well. He initially enjoyed a very comfortable margin in South Carolina because of the base of the African-American community. That base has eroded. He has lost a lot of that base, and Tom Steyer has cut into it. Pete Buttigieg has cut into it. Elizabeth Warren has cut into it. So I think he is going to struggle a little bit more, but he needs a very sizable victory to be able to continue on into Super Tuesday. But here's where I want to caution everyone. If you add up the delegates from Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, it's only 4% of the total delegate count. Super Tuesday will be another 34% of the delegates. So Super Tuesday will be a bigger indicator of the candidate that will last the longest in this race and have the best chance to win the nomination. And South Carolina will serve as the gateway to what those voters may do on Super Tuesday, given that there's 3 days between when we vote here in South Carolina and when Super Tuesday happens.
Anton, some are calling on former President Barack Obama to step in and endorse Joe Biden, his former VP, or basically anybody but Bernie Sanders. Why so far do you think Obama is staying on the sidelines?
Well, I think Barack Obama has shown the value of going through a competitive primary process. If you think back to 2007, there were 8 candidates that were in the race for president, including Barack Obama. And he really benefited from going state by state through every primary, every caucus to get to the nomination. It made him a better candidate because he had such a competitive process. And he firmly believes that having an open primary and having everybody compete for the opportunity to have the nomination is a benefit to that candidate when it comes to November. I also believe that there's a reason why he might stay out of it, because if we end up in a brokered convention, we're going to have a statesperson, someone that everyone respects, to help broker our convention if that is the case where we end up. And there's no better person to do that than Barack Obama.
Anton, some Democrats are getting quite pessimistic right now. They look at Bernie Sanders and they think that he's unstoppable for the nomination but unelectable in November. Do you share that pessimism?
I've been a candidate for public office before. I'm a former member of the South Carolina House. And I can tell you what's very important to a candidate that is down ballot is who's at the top of the ticket. Because the candidate that's at the top of the ticket has a propensity to connect you to voters, or it could harm you with persuadable and swing voters. And so with Bernie, the concern would be, if Bernie is on the ballot with me, is he going to help me or is he going to hurt me? And from what I've heard right now, I haven't heard anything that says that Bernie is going to help those kind of candidates. In a state like South Carolina, where I live, it's really important that we have the opportunity to elect candidates who can change the balance of the power on a local level. And we need good candidates who are unifying, but also at the same time not alienating. And that's the concern that we have with Bernie Sanders.
Anton Gun, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you might have noticed that Pete Buttigieg is really good at all kinds of things. He speaks lots of languages.
Yeah, and he plays an incredible number of musical instruments, enough to start his own band. Soupy music.
Look, bottom line, he wants people to know he's a smart dude, but he also wants to be humble.
Humble brags with Mayor Pete.
One thing that people might not know about you is that you speak 8 languages.
Depends what you mean by speak. Stel if Vegas, bij i Vegas, det som skedde på Vegas ska ligga där. And I learned Dari, which is kind of like Farsi, which is the language of Iran. So I see this man emerge, kind of Middle Eastern appearance as well. And the more I tried to say this in Farsi, the clearer it became that he didn't understand me at all. And then I realized he was an Arabic speaker, and I studied Arabic in college. The reporters from one of the local TV stations think that I'm his lawyer, and they start interviewing me. And one of them was from Telemundo, which was in Spanish, and they were asking me to try to ask him questions in Arabic, which I'm not that good at, and they were asking me in Spanish. And it was a real mess.
Humble brags with Mayor Pete.
And before we go this week, we're going to have a look at today's South Carolina debate, the 10th Democratic primary debate. And last week, Chaz, it was Mike Bloomberg who was in the barrel. It was his debut and it was inauspicious at that. Today, it was Bernie Sanders copping it.
Yeah, certainly. He's the front runner and these people don't have many chances to stop him being the nominee. This was kind of their last chance for Super Tuesday when 35% of delegates are going to be won.
Several lines of attack on Bernie Sanders coming really from all sides, including Elizabeth Warren, who's been kind of on Bernie's side ideologically, but also they've been kind of laying off each other throughout the course of this primary so far. Then we had attacks about the Castro stuff we talked about earlier in the program, and Mayor Pete Buttigieg. It seemed as he'd kind of singled Bernie out for an attack. Take a look at this.
If you want to keep the House in Democratic hands, you might want to check with the people who actually turned the House blue. 40 Democrats who are not running 41 on your platform. They are running away from your platform as fast as they possibly can. I want to send those Democrats back to the United States House.
Yeah, I think that was the most effective attack on Bernie. His response to all these attacks, number one, look at the polls. Yep. I'm winning the polls and I'm beating you guys in every way, favourability, etc. And he also said, this isn't radical. This is something that, my policies are something that happens all over the world. He says that a lot. He repeated that again today. I thought he dealt with the tax pretty well, to be honest. Yeah. But what about Bloomberg?
Well, what was interesting was that Bloomberg had clearly gone away, talked to his consultants about his terrible first-up debate performance, and I don't know, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but it seemed to me as though he might have juiced the crowd a little bit, gotten a few very vocal Bloomberg supporters on his payroll into this audience. Have a look at this. We hear every time Mike Bloomberg says something, we get the big woos, and every time Bernie Sanders says something, he gets the big boo, and it kind of got under Bernie's skin a bit. Have a look.
Cuba made progress on education. Yes, I think, really? Really?
I have a 6 million person organization around this country, Moms to Men Action in every town. Yeah. We have put background checks. We've got background checks.
Mayor Bloomberg has a solid and strong and enthusiastic base of support. Problem is, they're all billionaires. Now, if you look...
And we do know, Chaz, that Mike Bloomberg has a sort of psychological warfare unit which has been prodding at Donald Trump on Twitter. I get the impression from Bernie's sort of testy reaction to some of those jabs that maybe they've gotten under his skin. Maybe they've done a bit of research on Bernie as well.
The fact is, people haven't gone negative on Bernie very much in the past 4 years. And so this is kind of new for him. Yep. And if there's one thing Bloomberg can do, it's buy things. Buy ads, buy audience members. And it's so obvious he brought in his crew then, I felt, in the debate, because he didn't perform well. He was getting cheers for really bad lines. And actually, there was, to be honest, he came off to me like almost Monty Burns on Xanax. Like it really wasn't working for me. But there was one moment which I found very funny, a little bit revealing about the way Monty Burns on Xanax thinks underneath it all. Just have a listen to this.
All of the new Democrats that came in, put Nancy Pelosi in charge, and gave the Congress the ability to control this president, I got them. Number two,
I've bought, sorry, I mean, I helped these congressmen. Yeah, okay. But leaving aside Sanders and Bloomberg, there are 5 other people on stage today, all of whom are about to run out of money, apart from Steyer, and all of them are on their last chance, really. If they don't make it happen in a week's time in Super Tuesday, they're done. And so for them, there was a lot of desperation. They were all talking over each other. There was a just complete traffic jam all the time. How do you feel they're all coming off?
Well, I think it was a good thing that Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar were separated like two squabbling siblings, so they weren't pecking away at each other. Pete was trying to sort of talk over the top of Bernie. That was pretty terrible. Amy Klobuchar, she's really got this one message. I'm the one that can win in Republican states. I'm the one that can win. And it's sounding a little bit desperate. She did badly in Nevada. She's going nowhere right now, it seems, in South Carolina. Joe Biden, though, is interesting because he's back centre stage. He's the poll leader in South Carolina, and he'd clearly decided he needed to be a bit more assertive. He was tough on his rivals, he was tough on the moderators, and he was tough talking when he was talking about various policy issues. Take a look at the new Joe Biden.
The fact is, here's the deal. I'm not out of time. You spoke over time, and I'm going to talk. Here's the deal.
Yeah, I don't know if that really worked for Joe either. Basically, I just thought that the two standouts for me out of the other 5, you got Warren and Buttigieg trying different tactics to talk over people. Warren, I thought, actually pulled it off. when she was talking over people, they shut up and listened to her.
Yep.
She was interrupting all the time.
Yep.
Buttigieg tried the same thing. Everyone ignored him. He was like a mosquito buzzing away for 40 seconds, just talking underneath people. He never stopped.
Well,
and it became
speaking of
very
talking
annoying.
over, we're right out of time.
Fair
See
enough.
you for a fireside chat on Friday night on the ABC News Channel. More on the debate and plenty more besides.
See you then.